official title is How Squares Evolved. What I mean by that is how did we ever get from traditional square dance to modern square dance as done in square dance clubs? And there's a myth out there that up until 1940s, all anybody ever did was visiting couple squares, where first couple out to the right, swing your opposite, swing your own, and on to the next. And Lloyd Shaw sort of invented modern square dancing with all the different calls that you have to learn. And of course, that's taking two snapshots and extrapolating that that's all there ever was. So a lot of you are my age, give or take 5 or 10 years. Did you used to enjoy reading the funny papers on Sunday morning when the paper came? There was a feature, and I think it was in a lot of papers. That was about half a page of the comic section, and it was word games and fill in the picture and what's the difference between these two pictures and so forth. Do you remember a game where you took a 4-letter word, say warm, and by changing one letter at a time, you ended up with a completely different word like cold? That's kind of how square dancing evolved. It changed a little at a time until if you go to a square dance club now, it's practically unrecognizable. But there's a little bit of irony in there, and that is that traditional Western dancing tended to be very circular, very swooping in its motions, and very beautiful in a lot of ways. And there's two big overall strains of square dance. There's the across the set kind of figures, which come from the old cotillions and quadrilles of the 18th and 19th century. And that's sometimes thought of as New England style, even though there are and were visiting couple dances in New England style. But there's the kind of a trademark figure was something like heads right and left through, head ladies chain, sides the same, that sort of thing. And then there's the around the set tradition, and we don't really know as much as we'd like to about where that comes from. That's the prevailing style in the southern mountains, and you see vestiges of it right up the Atlantic into New England and York State. So the across the set is made up of figures, basic movements, basic building blocks like ladies chain, like right and left, stars to some extent. Whereas the around the set or visiting couple tradition is made up of unique figures, each with a name, each with a unique set of motions, like Bird in the Cage, like Duck for the Oyster, like Mountaineer Loop, and so forth. And in each town, the caller might know 6 or 12 of them and would throw them at the dancers in any order. But there wasn't so much emphasis on learning basic building blocks. Each figure was complete in itself. And that's the kind of dance that Lloyd Shaw, starting about the 1930s, was reviving with his performing high school kids that went around the country and got people excited about square dancing. And then after the war, a lot of people formed these square dance clubs where you dressed up and you took lessons and you joined a club, and it was sort of exclusive in the sense that they wanted to know who was a square dancer and who wasn't. But the dancing didn't change at first. The first thing that changed was the structure, the organization, and the idea that you didn't just show up at a dance, that you had to have about 6 lessons before you could pass muster. And then gradually, during the 1950s and 60s, they started inventing new dances and combining the old basics in different ways and eventually writing new basics. And what happened was a lot like the word game, in that they would add things 1 or 2 at a time, but then they would drop some of the old things. Just as in contra dancing now, you've got several new moves, but you don't see contra corners as much as you used to at an urban dance. And partly because it sort of requires an unequal setup where the ones do more than the twos. And the same thing with the squares in the 50s and 60s, that they got rid of things where some people were moving and some people were standing still. They tried to find ways to keep everybody moving all the time, just as that's the ideal now in urban contra dancing, that you don't want to leave anybody standing still. So it changed gradually, but just as with the word game, going from warm to cold or cold to warm, after a while it got so that it was almost unrecognizable if you knew any traditional square dancing. I started square dancing in school in the 50s, and in the middle 1960s, I started dancing in New York City with some square dance clubs. And at that point in the evolution of squares, it was possible for somebody with a solid background in traditional, or what was then called Eastern style square dancing in New York, it was possible for somebody who knew their stuff to walk into a square dance club and get by. There were only 2 or 3 moves that they used consistently that were not in the traditional repertoire. 10 years later, that was impossible. If you knew just about everything there was to know about traditional squares in any region of the country, you couldn't just walk into a square dance club. It had completely changed character. So let's take a look at some of the old stuff and some of the transitional stuff from the late 1940s, early to mid 1950s. Dorothy Shaw, Mrs. Lloyd Shaw used to call swoopies, dances that have a lot of circular motion. These are based on the Southern Mountain figures. In fact, they're the same as a lot of the Southern Mountain figures, but in the West it was more customary to do them in 4-couple squares, as in parts of the South, rather than in a big circle, as in other parts of the South. So this is what you might have encountered anywhere west of the Mississippi in the 1930s. The basic pattern is that the one couple leads out to the right, does a figure, goes on to the next, and does either the same figure or a different figure, goes on to the last, etc. And then there's a chorus, of course, usually Alaman left, grand right, and left, promenade. But there's also a little sub-chorus, which was done after each visiting couple figure. And in different regions it had different names. In parts of the South, you might hear it called Georgia Ragtime or Georgia Alabama. In the upper Midwest it might be called Run the Reel. And I seem to remember it has at least 2 or 3 other names. But what Lloyd Shaw collected and disseminated, it was called the do-si-do, not to be confused with the back-to-back do-si-do of the Northeast. So let's have couple number 1 go over to couple number 2, couple number 3 go over to couple number 4, so everybody's looking at this at the same time. And either, at this point, you will be circling 4 to the left, either as part of a visiting couple figure or after a visiting couple figure that doesn't include it. For instance, let's do a simple figure. Around that couple, and you take a little peek. The first couple, keep your partner's hand and lean over past the inactive couple, lady to the right, Jay to the left, and try to look at each other behind that couple. And it's perfectly okay if the inactive couple tries to keep them from doing that. You can bend over backwards, try to block their view. So it's around that couple, and you take a little peek, back to the center and swing your sweep. And all these swings are short swings, so you have my permission to use a walk-around swing if you want, or you can do a buzz swing, but it will be only 4 to 8 counts. And then around that couple, and you peek once more, back to the center, and you circle up 4. Join hands and circle to the left. Okay, freeze right there. Now there are several ways to do this, and the way that Lloyd Shaw and his group settled on to do the western or southwestern do-si-do is like this. I'm going to come out into the middle. Okay. and take your place.
Karen?
Okay, so from a circle, we are going to do a corner roll away. The ladies are going to roll to the right in front of your corner, and the ladies will switch places like so. And almost immediately, we will catch left hands with our partner, and we're not going to do a full turn. We're just going to almost just change places like this, and the gents are going to reach behind each other's back and turn your opposite.
No, the other way, Wayne.
Behind your back.
Turn your opposite all the way around with the right hand, all the way around, and the gents reach behind each other again to courtesy turn your partner, like the end of a lady's thing. And at that point, the call is usually one more change and on you go, and that means instead of wheeling to face that couple, you do a little mini promenade in that position to go to the next couple or to go home, depending on which couple you were with. So watch it again. It's corner roll away, left hand past your partner, opposite right all the way around, and courtesy turn to your partner. So from a circle, it'll be break it all up with a do-si-do. Corner roll away, partner left, neighbor right, all the way around, courtesy turn your partner right. Wow.